Edibles gave me a nightmare trip. A story sent in by a subscriber. This takes place in what I believe to be the late summer of 2019. I can't say for certain though, because this was the time of my life where I was sleeping most of the day and smoking stupid quantities of pot. Basically anything I could do to cope with my clinical depression, suicidal thoughts, and PTSD. As you might guess, waterboarding my brain in THC and being starved of dopamine and serotonin for so long results in some vague and blurry memories, but I do my best here to include as much detail as possible. With that disclaimer and context taken care of, let's jump into the story at hand. The entire situation begins when my dad and stepmom decide to leave town for a trip. I honestly can't remember what the purpose of the trip was. I guess it was to visit family or just go on vacation. But the only thing I was concerned with was the opportunity to blast my brain and avoid all semblance of real-world responsibility. This was before weed was legalised in my state, so I made arrangements with my dealer to acquire as much bud as I could afford. My plan was to go full zooted Zaza zombie. I remember this being the only time in my life that I seriously considered stealing money. Also, I could afford more marijuana. I'm relieved when looking back on this situation that I never stole from my family, even though I had the opportunity to many times. Anyways, I cleared my wallet on several grams of my dealer's top shelf gelato that he got in from Colorado, just in time to start my binge the night my parents left town. By the time they had rolled out the driveway, I was already rolling and lighting a joint, and by the time the sun was beginning to set, it was time to move to the main phase of my plan. I crushed and spread the majority of my stash onto a baking tray to decarb in preparation for infusing some canna butter. I eyeballed the proportions and didn't really know what I was doing, so I really had no idea how strong it was going to be. As it turned out, it was extremely strong. This summer was unique because it was a moth bloom year in my area. Moths literally covered the windows trying to get to the light, and the light beams from lamps outside illuminated countless moths buzzing and flapping into one another. I love insects, and especially moths, so this is a notable part of the experience. Moths and butterflies are symbolic of death, and therefore transformation. Moths are active at night, and I feel the darker side of the symbol of transformation. I'm not a very spiritual person, but part of me likes to think that the moths ushered in the bad trip to come as a reflection of my deepest fears and traumas. As the night went on, I remember taking pictures of my face and being highly critical of my appearance. Some real vain vampire shit. The dogs watched my strange behaviour over the night with an expression like, "The fuck?" While my canna butter was infusing, I just kept smoking weed to get as high as I possibly could. At some point, I remember going into the backyard and walking back and forth listening to my music, completely creating a really cool video game in my head. I crafted the world, music, gameplay, look and characters for the game completely in my head. I remember feeling sad that I would never make this game in real life, because I lacked the discipline to do so. I eventually finished and strained the canna butter, and turned into sleep while watching YouTube. The next morning is when the trip really begins. I woke up still high, but that was good to me. I fed and pet the dogs, and lit up another joint to greet the day as stoned as possible. Today was the day I was going to saturate my brain in as much jar as possible. I made myself toast and tea. I spread several generous tablespoons of my nightmare canna butter onto some toast with jam, and added some more to a cup of tea. I went out back to sit and look at the yard as I ate. Fucking disgusting. The flavour was absolutely putrid and packed with weed terpenes, and it took me a while to choke it all down, but in my mind at the time, it was completely worth it. But I was completely wrong. Eventually, I finally cleared my plate, and my fate was sealed. I was already high, so the come up snuck on me somewhat, but I fairly quickly realised that things really looked distinct and beautiful. I seemed to consider objects in their entirety, and even the most mundane sights looked so beautiful. I remember plucking a sleeping moth off of the stucco wall, and delighting in its shape and form. I fixated on the tiny feathers that created grey patterns on its wings, until it buzzed out of my hand. Most people who have been very stoned can probably relate to what I'm saying about how amazing things can look. I just walked around my house and appreciated the beauty of everyday objects and scenes. Eventually, I noticed a static at the edge of my vision as I continued to get higher and higher. The things in the corner of my eyes looked blurred and colourful, like pressing your palms to your closed eyes. My mind was so elsewhere that I could no longer appreciate the visual beauty around me. Things began to seem dull and far off. I did not even comprehend most of what I was looking at. I was feeling so high that staying upright felt difficult, and I just felt so tired, so I decided to lie down and watch YouTube on my laptop. I spent an unknown amount of time just browsing YouTube, but eventually I arrived at the topic of astro and particle physics, and considering particle behaviour in the Big Bang was absolutely crazy to my zooted mind. It was mad how I clearly was able to visualise properties like particle spin and probability clouds. I eventually came into a psychedelic state while watching videos of space. I realised that I was the universe observing itself, that the matter, energy and entropy that makes up and drives outer space, galaxies, other people, other life and myself, is all in fact the same stuff. I felt emotion at how much of an insane miracle and coincidence it is that I could live and think and see the universe, and therefore myself. I realised that I was part of a beautiful and unbelievably big process, and that my identity, struggles and joys were all tiny specks in the grand scheme of things. I was just a tiny piece of the universe, given the gift of consciousness and perception. What a beautiful thing. What an honour. What a miracle. This was the highlight of what I realise now to be basically a full-on trip. After this realisation and sense of peace, the trip quickly spiralled downward into darkness. I essentially lost all sense of vision. Although, I am aware that I could see my surroundings, I was not connected to the inputs coming into my eyes, and was only able to really witness the images my mind generated. I started to think about how worthless I was to squander this miracle of life. I was a unique process given the privilege of thought, free choice, and the ability to influence the world, despite being composed of matter and processes that could not themselves be conscious or change the world. How foolish of me to spend my time getting high and feeling sorry for myself. Fucking worthless. I felt so critical of myself for not making an impact in the world, for not making things, for not researching and discovering, and for not forming emotional connections. I just felt so small and worthless. The absurd situation that is the universe conspired through coincidence to create the process and identity of me, and all I could do was feel depressed. These thoughts became more abstract and less based on words. I lost all concept of my surroundings and of myself as an ego or distinguished identity. I experienced a new world and identity composed of my own imagination, and the absurd amount of THC flooding my brain. I was reduced to a low consciousness soul. I was a white orb, almost sperm-shaped. I was in a dark, dull tube. I was fighting furiously to reach the end. I saw the end of the tunnel as it came out to a flared lip shape. I knew that I absolutely needed to reach the end, the other side. Life was on the other side. I reached the space beyond, but I couldn't quite escape. I slid backward in despair. I fought so hard to stop sliding, but I couldn't. I eventually slid out the other end of the tunnel in free fall. There was another tunnel just underneath the first tunnel waiting to catch me. I fell back through the second tunnel just like the first one. I was in horrified agony. I fought so hard trying to make progress to get up to the second tunnel, but I just couldn't. I fell backwards again, and discovered tunnel after tunnel, each beneath the previous one. I realised that I had failed. I was a soul trying to achieve actualization and birth, but I couldn't make the cut. I fell and slid backwards for a small eternity. I eventually hit the bottom, and fell into a small area. My surroundings were doldrums grey. I felt compressed and I panicked. I thrashed and I tried to escape, but I was imprisoned. No matter how I thrashed, moved, or tried to free myself, I was held fast in a colourless membrane, in a colourless box. I was so uncomfortable. I was squashed and suffocated and felt unbearably claustrophobic. This membrane would just not let me free of my confined area at all. My perspective then zoomed out, and I realised that I was one of many trapped and failed souls. We were all confined in these membranes in a square matrix that went on for eternity. I couldn't escape, because I would just bump up against more confines. These confines is all there was. Then they were cubes in the matrix of imprisoned souls stretched for eternity, in all 3 dimensions, and then extra dimensions that I could not comprehend. I cannot truly convey the feeling of claustrophobia, of being trapped and suffocated in an infinite spiritual prison. There was no escape, because there was nothing else for me anymore. I was condemned. Eventually, I started to come down. I came back to my body and my identity, but I was very shaken. I was still high, but I decided to throw out the rest of the canna butter, realising that I'd gone too far with it, and I felt that the canna butter itself was evil. I spent the next few hours trying to return to a normal brain space. I showered and took my dogs for a walk, which made me feel better. I eventually just went to sleep and woke up feeling still strange the next day. After the next few days had passed, I started to feel normal again. I've since experimented with LSD and mushrooms, but I've never experienced a psychedelic experience just like this experience I had. I have since improved my life after that long bout of depression. I live with my boyfriend now, and I'm pursuing education and a degree. I wrote this up to make peace with the experience. I now explain the trip as the manifestation of my depression and the pandemic to come. The soul trying to be born but feeling thwarted mirrored my struggle to reach adult actualization. Falling backwards into that prison was my own prison of my depression, and how I became stuck for so long in my depression, which is represented by the claustrophobic feeling as well as the depressing grey colour. The matrix of other souls could be thought of as all the other young adults out there feeling thwarted by depression and a late-stage capitalist society without meaning. If you're going through depression right now, I promise it will get better. There'll be ups and downs, and life might not be exactly what you want or expect, but depression is an illusion that can only fade with time. Just don't underestimate the psychedelic properties of THC, and especially edibles, unless you really do want to be immobilised in bed for several hours, experiencing firsthand the pain and terror of a soul failing to come into existence and condemned to eternal imprisonment. Bloody hell, that was a seriously intense edible trip right there. It just goes to show how much more potent edibles are than consuming THC via smoking or other methods. I can personally vouch for this as well. For those that don't know, I used to be a massive stoner back in the day, proper little pothead like. In 2018 I was literally smoking it every single day, smoking so much, spending all my money on it, and happily doing so as well, because obviously it allowed me to cope with the mundanity of life. I hated being sober, I couldn't enjoy anything without being panned. That's what we call it in the northwest of England, being panned, or at least I do around here. So yeah, we're getting panned out my head, mate, and just enjoying life and having a good time, but knowing in the back of my head subconsciously that it was a pure coping mechanism, and that realistically I would be completely fucked without bud. I wouldn't be able to cope with life, wouldn't be able to enjoy things. I'd just be even if I go a day without, I'd just be thinking like, oh, I really need a biff right now. The cravings were unreal. It's the worst addiction I've ever gone through by far. I know I've talked about my ketamine addiction, but Jesus, quitting bud and reeling off it and sort of adjusting back to sober life was really hard. And even when I tried doing it when I was in the midst of being a stoner, I just literally gave up every single time. I couldn't even make it a day without it. Until cannabis started to affect me in a psychedelic manner, where basically I'd have it, and instead of just being able to give in to reality and just get stoned and bask in like the feelings of being absolutely blazed out my head, it was instead thrusting me into a 5-MeO DMT like headspace. I've never actually done 5-MeO, but from every single thing I've read about it, it put me in that exact headspace. There was no visuals or anything per se. I didn't trip out like this person did. This person had like a serious, like, mystical psychedelic experience of major hallucinations. I've never actually had that. It just thrust me into the fucking like God consciousness state, and it makes me hyper-analyze my behavior and things that I push to the back of my subconscious, like, oh, you're not doing this in your life, you're being lazy, you take it again, like this person says, taking the miracle of life for granted. That was the one thing that really depressed me when I'd get blazed after it started feeling psychedelic. I'd just have one or two tokes thinking, oh yeah, I'll just be able to get stoned and enjoy myself tonight, and I'd always go into like super introspection mode and not be able to handle anything at all, and I'd get like serious tachycardia, fucking feel like my heart was going to come out my mouth like chest burster style. Absolutely horrible, really. But in a sense, like, there was a beauty in the suffering, because it was really making me reconsider what I was doing with my life. And it was one of the things that inspired, once I got off bud, it was one of the things that inspired me to do YouTube again, because I was like, I need a hobby, I need to occupy my time other than just fucking getting absolutely blazed. Whoa, it just started raining big time outside and it skits me out. But yeah, it's actually funny now, this past week or so, I've had like the occasional toot on a joint, and I've actually been feeling really good, because I know that I'm actually sorting my life out now and doing the things that I was suppressing when I was getting blazed to sort of mask reality and mask how I was feeling. So it really does amplify the energy you go into with the experience. Cannabis, it's an extremely potent tool, but I think for the first few years of people using it, especially when you're a teenager, it's just about, I just want to get fucking blazed, bruh. And then later on, when you start having more like introspective personal development type experiences and you raise your consciousness, the experience just becomes so much deeper, and you can't exactly hide from yourself anymore. It makes you just face up to your demons, I've found, every single time. So if there's something I'm suppressing or anxious or guilty or depressed about, it sort of makes me like go through the pure suffering of facing up to that, sort of like an ego dissolution experience. And then I have to literally sort of try and integrate that experience without hiding from it, because if you hide from it and then get blazed again, the suffering just becomes even more intense. And I tell you what, the anxiety and paranoia from like a super THC high is worse than any other psychedelic headspace I've ever been in personally. A bit like what this person describes here, like they say they've experimented with LSD and mushrooms but never experienced a psychedelic experience like that one. And yeah, it just shows how potent it can really be. And edibles are actually a lot of stoners actually find it a lot more trippy when they consume edibles. When I've had my first scran of an edible, I was shocked at how blitzed I actually was. It was completely unlike smoking weed. It felt a lot more trippy and in depth. And yeah, I went into this introspective mode, and Jesus Christ, if I had an edible nowadays, holy shit, it'd fucking just like thrust me to the centre of infinity probably, because I'm already sensitive enough with cannabis itself. And obviously I don't have a tolerance anymore because I just don't use it regularly, so every time I do just have it, it's just with my mates, so my tolerance never has chance to increase, so I'm always constantly being absolutely like blasted by it. And some of the buds like my mates smoke, like some fucking premium Colorado shit or whatever, that I'm just so not used to, and obviously they smoke it because like it gets them higher because the tolerance is so high, and I'd literally just be able to get blazed off like the worst fucking like skunk weed or whatever, or just a low weed in low THC content. I even get sort of blazed when I have like CBD joints that have like 0.8% THC, even if I have like a full joint of that, because I do enjoy CBD, I'll get fucking blazed at my head like it's really quite mad. Yeah, so this is a really interesting report. I'd like to do more edible reports in the future. If you've got one, please send it in. It doesn't have to be a nightmare trip, doesn't have to be a positive trip, can just be like a mundane one. That's the thing, I just want to cover every single spectrum of the psychedelic experience. I know sort of lately I've been focusing the more like crazy, ridiculous, like out there negative ones in a sense, but there's always that positivity, like literally at the end of this report and within the report saying like they realised sort of being the universe observing themselves. That's massively beneficial, that's so unbelievably positive. Just because they have that and then go to like this low conscious state doesn't mean it's a wholly negative thing. It's the balance in it, it's the yin and yang, and then they come out and they have an even deeper sense of positivity, sort of positivity with a capital P. where they integrated the dark and the light and ascended in a sense. This person now lives with a boyfriend, pursuing education. It's fucking great. So yeah, it just shows you that you've just got to sometimes go through the shit to come out the other side a deeper and more spiritually purer person. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed that one, and I'll see you in the next video.